Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning and good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Stacey Alvarez de la Campa. I am the content manager with Island Innovation, and we are having a conversation this afternoon with the esteemed Mr. Dr. James Hospedales, and he is the founder of EarthMedic and a former director of the Caribbean Public Health Agency, and the founder and CEO of the Earth Nurse Foundation for Planetary Health. EarthMedic is an international NGO which seeks to improve planetary health through environmental protection and public health awareness. Their most recent event was an event entitled Climate Change and Health in Small Island Developing States. And that was held between the 5th and the 8th of October, and it was a fantastic event. So Dr. Hospedales, how are you doing? Tell us a bit about what brought you to the arena of planetary health and the climate.
Well, thank you, Stacey. Muy buenos días, bonjour, guten morgen, good morning or good afternoon to folks who are listening. What brought me to planetary health? I guess most of my life journey, aware that the environment was being degraded all around us, everywhere I've lived, in the Caribbean, in North America, in England. My scientific and medical training, that I could see that the whole earth is sick. Patient earth. We talk about patient earth. The signs and symptoms are there for those who have eyes to see. And the major manifesto, the major driver is climate change. And I'm a person of faith, and if you look at the Bible, it says right at the beginning, as God made the earth, 5 times, it says, it was good. The seas, the fishes, the trees, and the people. So if that is real, God can't be very happy with what we're doing. So those streams kind of led me to be awoken to the climate crisis. And then I began to realize that all the things that I'd wrestled with my professional life, pandemics, hurricanes, and a slow-moving disaster of chronic disease, obesity, diabetes, these are actually all connected to the climate change problem. And I can say a bit more about that. But I was on the disaster response team, the Pan American Health team, for 8 years. And I saw how the big hurricanes were mashing up our islands, and their behavior has changed. You used to have one, back in the day, you'd have one good hurricane a year, so to speak. And now you have so many hurricanes, and some of them are superstorms, like Dorian, that sat on the Bahamas for 36 hours. That made me realize, the floods in Guyana, I was there assisting in 2005-06, and Georgetown is below sea level. So that we had a massive leptospirosis outbreak at that time as a result of the flooding. So for several reasons, I retired from being director of COP 2 years ago, but I could not retire knowing what I know about climate. And then finally, I kind of at the family level, we've got 2 little grandsons. And you look at those boys and you think, what are they being born into? So I felt I had to give something back. I had to pay forward, and founded EarthMedic and Earth Nurse, really to get this message through to health professionals to wake up and get better informed, get equipped, because health professionals are credible in our society. And for them to raise the alarm, that they have a duty of care not only to the patient, but to the environment, which supports all of our lives. So that's a little bit the history, Stacey.
I think it's wonderful. You bring so many things together so well. I do love your idea of the planet being a place that can be a place of, respite and rest and love for future generations. Because we have to think about, we are not going to bear the brunt of some of the effects of this, even though we're bearing the brunt of it already. It's the legacy that we leave we should be concerned about. So that really resonates. And I love the connection you make between our health and the health of the planet. That it's reciprocal, and even our state of mind. I mean, you did mention certain physiological ailments and, disease like leptospirosis, the floods in Guyana. But even from the point of view of psychological and emotional health and the state of the planet. Could you say a little bit more about that, knowing how, we often look to nature as a way to get comfort?
Yes, nature has been a source of comfort and inspiration for hundreds or thousands of years since humans have been around. And we're destroying nature, actually. We're in the sixth great extinction crisis of this planet, and it's mostly because of human activity. About more or less 2/3 of the wild animal population, birds, animals, mammals, and so on, have been lost. And the consequences of that are many, many insects, for instance, that pollinate our food. We know that the population of bees are declining all over. And so it has an effect. Everything is connected. And
Yes,
this is
yes.
one of the things we have lost sight of. We haven't respected the interdependence of all of creation. And this is my a personal viewpoint, but it's not only a Christian one. You can look at Islamic thought leaders, Hindu thought leaders, and you see the same sort of realization that we have a responsibility to the environment, that our actions have consequences, karma, and that we need to take this more seriously. Our science and our knowledge so far maybe has made people feel a bit pumped up, but Mother Nature and the planet are reacting to the stresses we've put upon it. And that has mental health consequences as well. Some of the disasters that we face, some of the other, imagine you have a drought in your area for 3-4 years and you can't grow food. And what seeds you have, they've dried out. And when you do plant, there's a flood and it washes it away, which has happened in parts of Central America, parts of Jamaica. The mental health pressure of that is tremendous. So next week I'll be speaking at the Caribbean Network of Psychological Associations, because they too have woken up and are seeing a role for mental health counseling to prepare and then to adapt and respond to some of these disasters that we have.
Yeah, that's a very valid point in terms of, so we can see that we need resources, because one of the aspects, I think, of dealing with climate crisis in the Caribbean and small island developed states in general is, when we link health to the climate crisis, what resources are actually being allocated to health resources, to, empowering, medical personnel and seeing how there can be programs to build health resilience. Because one thing is the physical infrastructure of buildings, but there's another aspect of it. It's building our health as people. I mean, you'd mentioned non-communicable diseases, for example, as being a real problem, kind of the fallout of climate change.
Yes, the same forces driving climate change, that is to say, heavily mechanized agriculture dependent on fossil fuel, motorized transport, everybody driving everywhere, certainly in our islands. I mean, it's nice to have a car to drive, don't get me wrong, but if that's the only way you get around, then you're stressed, put on weight, get diabetes, high blood pressure, heart attack, stroke, go blind, kidneys fail. And this is not a joke, this is serious. This is happening at scale. So the pressure on the economies of governments who have scarce resources is tremendous on the health side. And what I find tragic is that it's mostly preventable. As a physician, I see that. But then as a planet doctor, I see, but wait a minute, some of the things we're recommending for climate change, these will have important co-benefits to health, more plant-based diets, and less of the promotion, especially to children, of high sugar, fat, junk food, more biking and walking and greening of our cities, so that you have a benefit to population health and you have a benefit to the planet. So one of the things that in EarthMedic we're really keen on is these win-win solutions. And if you could do that with the population of people who are insured with Guardian or Sagicor, well, there's an additional win for the company. So you have win for people, win for planet, and win for business. Now you ask about resources, and overall, our small islands are suffering from lack of access to resources based on our vulnerability. And not just on per capita income. And I know the chair of EOSIS has been stressing this. Many of the CARICOM leaders have been stressing it, and they're right. You can't only look at per capita income, you have to look at capacity of some of these islands and the unique vulnerability that we have. So there are some projects coming on stream now, and what we hope to do as well is to stimulate some of those resources to come into the health sector. We have about 500 hospitals and health facilities in the region. And there's a great program that Pan American Health has called Smart Hospitals, which makes them safer for severe weather, greener through things like solar electricity, and well maintained. And about 50 hospitals have had this program. Well, that means that's about 10%. So we still have a ways to go to raise awareness and scale up resources available for that. Because I tell you something, after a big disaster, if your house is washed away or blown away, the last thing you need is that the hospital is also in trouble, or the hurricane shelter. So shelters and health facilities really need to be at the front line of getting resources to become safer and greener. And it's possible. There's a program to do it. That's one area. Others I've just talked about, things like alternative transport, which make healthier people, and healthier planet, and things like changing our diets. We need front of pack labeling in our region about nutritional content, so that parents who are buying food can see that their children, they can choose, have a warning sign that says this thing is high in calories or sugar, you know, and that is something that's missing in the region, to empower people to make the right choice, a choice that's good for their health and a choice that's good for the environment and the planet.
Yeah, that's excellent. I love that you bring in the idea of choice, because we do all have a choice. And I think that's one way we can remain empowered and remain hopeful, because in the face of a lot of the kind of catastrophic news, we have to realize it's within our power to make a change and to make a positive change, because climate change, it can be linked to some fundamental determinants of health. We think about clean water, air, and, you know, sufficient food, adequate shelter. As you say, all of those things are being so negatively impacted by the climate crisis. And I've noticed in the region, we don't necessarily have it's an existential crisis for us, but in a way that I think is more subtle than necessarily rising sea levels. Granted, we do have issues with our coastal cities as well, but I think that we should be aware definitely that this is something that's not going away anytime soon, and we have to do something positive to change. What kind of, you had mentioned some recommendations such as, you know, walking more often, not necessarily driving everywhere, and a plant-based diet. Could you tell us a bit more about how you can see the linkage between a plant-based diet and climate change, or helping to have a positive impact on climate change?
Sure. Well, one of the contributors globally to climate change and the greenhouse gases is agriculture, and the production of meat and beef at the scale that we're doing it, and producing methane as well, which is a potent greenhouse gas. My wife's a veterinarian, and one of the curious things about the extra heat that we're having is that parasites multiply more frequently, and the cows are more likely to get it. And cows that are infested with parasites produce more methane. So once we disturb the balance too much, we end up with these kinds of problems. So if a people or a country and a world that is eating so much meat is therefore dependent on an agriculture system that's using fossil fuels, mechanized agriculture, transportation systems that are producing a lot of greenhouse gases. So if we switch to a more plant-based diet, eating more beans, rice, not saying stop meat, but eat less of it, then you're helping the planet and you're helping your own health. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. I think, I like the idea that people often think of things like a plant-based diet as a matter of an extreme, that you don't eat any meat at all. But if we all collectively maybe, you know, ate meat a few times less every week, you know, there's some of my households.
That's a good
something
start.
like that. Yeah, collectively, you know, it makes a big difference. I like the point you made about the industrialized nature of agriculture now, that, you know, not only does it have a negative impact on biodiversity because you're having monocultures and they're being, you know, farmed at scale, but it takes away the idea of the smallholder farmers that could help build food security, because I think that's another thing that's having a huge negative impact on or in the region. It's our lack of food security and the amount of food imports.
Yeah, and when we have some of the big disasters, the hurricanes that take away all the crops that are in the fields, then you end up importing perhaps more cheap low quality food, and you're at risk. You not only your food security but nutrition security
Yes.
becomes at risk. So it's again, things are all
Yes.
interconnected.
Yeah, it's all interconnected because, or as you say, that level of importation. I know, for example, in Barbados, I think we import approximately 90% of some of our, our food goods. And as a result of that, not only are prices high, but you know that nutritionally, once they've either been in a container for as long as they have, or but they've been frozen and thawed out and, put on the shelf, that they don't have the same nutritional density. And I think then people look for cheaper foods that are definitely not as healthy. And then that's the kind of follow-on negative effect of or lack of food security. That's also having a bad impact on our health for sure. In Trinidad, what is it like in terms of food security in your region, as it were, even though we're in the same region?
Well, I think the Caribbean as a whole, we're importing nearly all the calories we eat, or the majority. It would vary. So Trinidad would have a little bit more agricultural production, Guyana more so. But Trinidad also, the government here is bemoaning the food bill and encouraging more backyard gardening. In EarthMedic, we're very keen on hashtag trees for food. There are a lot of trees that, like breadfruit, like what we call piwa or peach palms, that produce crops that you can eat. When Columbus came here 500 years ago in Central America, the peach palm was a staple. And the invading Spaniards cut down tens of thousands of those trees to starve the native people into submission. But that indigenous crop is one that grows in several of them. It grows well in the islands. And more of that kind of resuscitation of trees for food would help with the climate, would help with food security, would help with shade, help with soil erosion, a range of things like that. So when I look at Barbados, it just seems to me you have a lot of yards, small yards, that could use one or two trees that would grow food, whether it's mangoes or avocados or breadfruit, that would help with the food security and help with nutrition security and less of the imported stuff. The divested sugar lands that we have in many of our Caribbean countries, I keep thinking, that is a good, why don't we make some of those lands over for community agriculture? If you lived in England at all, they had a system of allotment gardening during World War II that was meant for the nation to grow its own food and therefore, contribute to the war effort. Well, without wanting to use a military analogy, we're sort of in a big fight or war about this climate change. And so if we grow our own food, we're actually doing something positive for our health and for the economy and for the climate.
Yes, definitely. I think I like the point you made about Barbados and there being, these yards that need some more trees, because when COVID did hit and we had a huge lockdown and, prices soared and supplies were low, there was a nice kind of push. There was a general sentiment among people. I mean, I started my own small garden as well, that, everybody could collectively do this, and it became not so much a choice, but also a necessity. But then we realized that why hadn't we been doing this all along? Why hadn't we always been, having our little small plots of gardens? And because again, it's not just feeding your body, it's feeding your soul when you're outside tending to the garden and you're eating something you've grown. That leads to this, gives a sense of completeness and wholeness. Yeah.
That's a really important point you're making. A lot of scientific evidence that the mere act of caring for a plant, even if it's just one potted plant in your house, immediately your blood pressure comes down, your stress hormones come down, and you feel better. So, but still, a lot of people don't have any plants in their yard, don't have any plants in their house. So this is something to be encouraged and promoted. I really believe that it will be good for health and good for the climate.
Yes, I think so too. And I was wondering, what do you think, how do you see the role of young people now, the same generation that we want to protect and preserve the planet for? What role do you think they can play in not just raising awareness, but kind of concretizing climate action to do with how or the health of our climate is good for our health?
Well, I think people of all ages have a role to play because retired people, it was interesting in our conference last month, we had 1,200 people register. And, 20% of those were retired persons. And that struck me that perhaps many retired people not only have some time to go to a conference, but they're concerned about what's going on. Young people are often more, fired up and fiery uh, about this
they sure
threat that
are.
we face. And I think they play a vital role. We had a special event on engaging youth, and that had two parts to the discussion. One was in the medical and nursing schools. We have over 40 medical schools in the Caribbean, not only UWI, but all the offshore schools. How do we get climate inserted more into the curriculum?
Yes.
And in our secondary schools, the exam system, which is run by CXC, how do we get climate and environment issues inserted into the curriculum? So these were the two big threads of discussion, and young people were very fired up that this needs to happen and it needs to happen fast.
Yes.
That, so that would be a significant transformation if you're really inserting the issues around climate and environment into the curriculum of secondary schools.
Yeah, and that's actually a common thread I've seen since I've been, increasingly focused on these discussions over the past decade now. More and more people are realizing the necessity of not necessarily dismantling, but adapting our current educational system, which still right now, I mean, I'm old enough to remember, and it still is the case where it was kind of the choice between a doctor, a lawyer, and engineer. That was what you should do. And now I'm seeing that there's a greater awareness that, particularly amongst young people, the role of agriculture, farming doesn't mean necessarily, we have the socio-historical connotations of it being linked to slavery to an extent, as opposed to it being a way to feed, an act of patriotism almost, an act of love for Mother Earth, and a way to enhance our own stability and the power of our own people. So I think incredible.
You're right. And one of the challenges with agriculture and farming in the Caribbean, from the kinds of presentations that we had from Cardi and others, is the reduced number of farmers. So that definitely the future of that lies with young people, and incentives and promotion so that farming becomes an attractive occupation, and promotion, micro loans, also micro insurance from the insurance companies. So if your crop fails because of the climate, then you're less at risk if you go into that area. A lot of serious attention needs to be given to this if we're to have better health, better food security, better climate.
Yeah, and I love how, again, all of those things are linked, right?
I have to do that. We have to join up the silos. You can't just have agriculture conversation and think about, we can export this and make some money. You have to think about your population health. You have to think of the environment. Yeah, that's one of my missions, joining up silos.
That's fantastic. I think that's a wonderful mission, because we do have that in the region, because we're different islands, and I know other regions, us in the Caribbean, we're different islands, quite different in our own way. And I think it would be great to see some more inter-regional collaboration, particularly as it results to the educational sector and what we can do to, as you say, diversify the curriculum to make it more relevant. And there are young people out there who would definitely, I think, take up the mantle, because they're so fiery, as you say, and lead the way. We have to look to them to lead the way.
Well, the Secretary General of CARICOM spoke at our youth event, Dr. Carla Barnett, and she's very keen on youth. And you can't think of a better area, I think, than responding to climate change, for engaging youth, for creating employment, for helping with the planet, and for giving people meaningful reason to focus on that area.
Yeah, and I think this is definitely one of the ways we can look to collaborate with young people who are fiery and passionate, but could sometimes need the guidance and seeing, the diplomacy. I tell my son that all the time, he's 15. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. People will get the message, and, you can be consistent in that message, because, we're living the reality. When I think of Barbados, we would very rarely get serious hurricanes. We now have what we call superstorms that will come over a couple of days, and there's thunder and lightning, and the heat that we're seeing is absolutely unbearable for us here. So I'm really glad that your organization, EarthMedic and Earth Nurse, that's one of your focus. So what's your main focus with EarthMedic and your main focus with Earth Nurse? Are they two kind of different but complementary aims that you have with those NGOs?
Good question. So it started off with sort of EarthMedic and EarthNurse, and we acquired both domain names, earthmedic.org and .com and earthnurse.org and .com. And then in the discussions, we said, you never see a critically ill patient being looked after by the doctor alone. There's always a team. The doctor may do the diagnosis and have some idea of the prescription, but who is making the case management plan? Who is monitoring? Who's following up? It's going to be the nurse. And if the whole planet is sick, we felt it had to be a partnership between doctors and nurses. Secondly, we're into the business of advocacy. And in advocacy, you need numbers. And there are 30 million nurses and 10 million doctors. Close my case.
Yep. Yeah, that says it all. And I was saying before we started, my dad's a doctor, my mom's a nurse, so she would love hearing you say that it's the nurses that are the ones that do the follow-up and do the real work.
And in many of our countries, you go to the health center, it's the nurse. You go to places in Guyana or Suriname, and it is going to be a nurse that's manning or womaning the health service. Yeah. So this is the backbone of the health services. The public health nurses are the backbone of our vaccination programs, many of our chronic disease programs. So I feel that we've definitely got to get nurses better informed, better equipped. I was talking yesterday to the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association. They're on board. They join us in some of our tree planting exercises. And I think if we can get nurses more, better, more confident to stand up and speak about some of this, it would be to the benefit of everyone.
I think that's an absolutely fantastic point. I think, and it, again, it ties into being an earth nurse, the idea of monitoring what we're doing to the planet, doing the follow-up checks, making sure that our checks and balances are happening, and recognizing that reciprocity in the relationship between us and the earth, I think is absolutely really, really important.
In many areas, water quality, air quality, lots of things that the earth nurses have a vital role to play.
Yeah, and I think I like that idea of advocacy. I'll definitely be reaching out to you for that, about the earth nurse concept. I think that's fantastic. And, also the idea of bringing that to bear to our young people, because that's another profession that there are not that many people getting involved in right now, is exactly public health and nursing. So I think that speaks to the need to raise awareness about how much it's needed, and the contribution, the role it has to play in society benefiting as a whole. It's absolutely crucial. Now we're coming up to the end of our time in our session. Any last words you want to leave us with, Dr. Hospedales? Anything you want to say? Thank you so much for being here with us. But I'd like to hear a pearl of wisdom out of your many.
Well, I think I'm really glad to have chatted to you about health and climate change. For many years, there's been, the environment, how it's changing, and climate and the economy. But there's an awakening now that this really has serious health implications. And the other side to that is climate action has health co-benefits. So climate action improves health is a key message for us. We need to do more gathering of data to understand that and to be able to advance that case with policymakers. But talking about this issue is the most important thing we can do. And through the press, through shows like this, and other ways of engaging people with, and also not just the doom and gloom, but the practical things, as we've been talking about, what you can do to help.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Yes, it has to, hope, I think, inspires action. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Dr. Hospedales, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Bye-bye.